Chapter 5. The Secret Swimming. The Hawkwood team worked hard all through the winter months. Nutty found the swimming difficult, but she kept trying, and Nails helped her. He was growing more friendly now, and with his help, Nutty began to get better quickly. "If I can ride," he said, "you can swim." It was true that Nails could ride well now, but he still refused to change horses. "It's Firelight I'm riding in the competition," he said. "So why change?" The shooting was a problem. They had no guns, and the lessons were very expensive. Nutty didn't know what they were going to do about it, but the competition wasn't until August, and they were getting better at the other things. Jazz and Humi had stopped taking the bus to school and ran there every day. It was Nutty herself who found the running difficult. So winter passed and spring came. More people started coming to the swimming pool, and this meant that it was always crowded. It was all right for Seb Smith and his team. The Smiths had a pool in their garden, so the Greycoats team could swim there. Nutty saw their pool one night when she was riding near the Smiths' house. It was down at the end of the garden, and there were trees between the pool and the house. Nutty realized that they could swim there, and no one could see them from the house. When she arrived home, she told Gloria about it. "Well," Gloria said, "Friday's your night. Mr. and Mrs. Smith go out, and Seb takes me to a film. The place is empty by 7. So, every Friday night, Nutty's team used the Smiths' pool. The weather was cold to begin with, and the first time that Humi jumped into the water, he came up with a scream. 'It's like ice,' he cried as he tried to get out. But Nails caught him and held him round the neck. 'Get swimming,' he shouted. But the days grew warmer, and one evening Nutty was sitting beside the pool with Nails, watching Jazz and Humi swimming. She was feeling pleased. Jazz was a born swimmer, she decided. She stood up and went to get a sweet from the pocket of her coat, which was over by the trees. Suddenly she heard voices on the other side of the trees. She went cold with fear. "Come and have a look at our pool," said the voice. "I thought Seb had gone out, but he seems to be there." Nutty dropped her coat and ran back to Nails. "Mrs. Smith," she said. "She's coming. Get them out." Humi was just finishing. Nutty flew round the pool, got down and screamed at him, "Humi, get out!" He looked up with his mouth open, drank half the pool and went under the water. Nutty caught him by a handful of skin and pulled him over to the side. "The Smiths are here," she cried. "Quick!" He jumped up towards her and she pulled him out. He ran as fast as his legs would carry him, but Jazz was still going up and down in the water and did not hear Nails' cries to get out. Mrs. Smith appeared with another lady at her side, smiling. "Hello, my dears," she said. They ran, leaving Jazz behind. The next minute they disappeared through a hole in the hedge. Nutty was the last to go, and she saw the smiling lady look down into the pool and heard her say, "Why, how brown he is! Have you been to Spain for the holidays?" They flew down the street, but came to a stop when an old man, who was taking his dog for its evening walk, gave them a very strange look. "What shall we do?" cried Nutty. "We've left all our clothes there. They stood there with water running from them, not knowing what to do. 3 older boys were coming along the street towards them, and a group of children on bicycles started riding round and round them." "Let's get home," Nails said angrily. "We can't leave Jazz." Nutty stopped and looked back, and just then Jazz appeared through the hole in the hedge. Usually, of course, Jazz's long hair was hidden under his turban. Sikhs never cut their hair, and although Jazz wanted to cut his parents wouldn't let him. Now, Jazz's swimming hat had fallen off, and he looked really wild with his long wet hair falling halfway down his body and covering his face. He came flying towards them, and cries of "Stop! Stop!" came from the garden. Dogs in other gardens began to bark loudly. "Why didn't you tell me?" said Jazz unhappily. A bus was coming slowly along the road. By now the boys had started to run towards them, and the children on bicycles, still going round and round them, were shouting and laughing. "Quick, let's get out of here!" Nutty cried. She raced along the road towards the bus stop with her arm up to stop the bus. The others ran with her. The shouting behind them grew wilder, and Nutty saw the bus driver's surprised face as the bus screamed to a stop. It was a double-decker bus, and Nutty and the others got on quickly at the back and ran upstairs. "We haven't bought tickets," Humi said in a quiet, frightened voice. "Let's just hope that no ticket inspector gets on," Nutty answered. The bus was full and everybody was looking at them. Nutty slid down in her seat, but without clothes, there was nothing to hide her. Jazz shook his hair, which fell down over his face, and he sat there looking like some strange wild animal. But a ticket inspector did get on at the next stop. He came up to Jazz's seat. "Tickets, please," he said. Jazz began to speak very quickly in Punjabi, the language his parents used at home. Nutty looked out of the window, hoping for more time, but the inspector came to her next. "I've lost my handbag," Nutty said, and she got down on the floor looking for it. "You never had a handbag, madam," the inspector said, not amused. Humi was also pretending to look for his ticket under his seat, and the inspector went up to Nails next. "Tickets, please," he shouted. Nails did not answer. The inspector tried again, but Nails still didn't move. "He can't hear," Nutty explained. "He's deaf." The inspector stopped the bus. "Come on," he said. "Get off, the four of you. This is the seafront, and that's what you must be looking for." "But it's cold out there." "Then wear some clothes next time." There was a cold wind down by the sea, and they all lived on the other side of town. Nail's house was the nearest, so they decided to go there and get some clothes. The run through the center of town was something that they would never forget. The crowd shouted with laughter when they saw this strange group, dressed only in swimming things, and Jazz with his long black hair covering his face. But they finally reached the little house where Nails lived. Some minutes later, 3 very strange figures left, wearing borrowed clothes which did not fit, and which were years out of date. When Nutty arrived home, she had to tell her parents what had happened. They were very angry. "Right," said her father. "You can just get changed. We're going round to the Smiths and you can tell them you're sorry about all this." It was all right for the others, thought Nutty miserably. They were in the factory with the horses while she, the team captain, was left with all the problems. Her father drove her up to the rich part of town to the Smith's house. When they arrived, Nutty was sorry to see that the lights were on, the Smiths were in, and there was no escape. Mrs. Smith opened the door. "Well?" she said icily. "My daughter has come to say she's sorry," Nutty's father explained. "Yes, well, come in and talk to my husband." Nutty did not want to go in. She hated this house, Everything showed that the Smiths had lots of money, very different from Nail's poor little house, but Seb's father seemed more friendly than angry, and Nutty said that she was sorry for using their pool secretly. "That's all right," said Mr. Smith, "but ask first next time." Then, to Nutty's surprise, he offered them a drink. He wanted to know why she and her friends were using the pool, and Nutty told him all about the competition. "Do you mean you're doing all this yourselves with no help? Do your teachers know?" Nutty didn't know, and she didn't really care. But Mr. Smith laughed. "I think that's wonderful, Mr. McTavish," he said to Nutty's father. "We give Sebastian too much," he went on. "I've had to work for what I've got, and your Deirdre's the same. She's a worker, and she can use our pool when she wants to." Then he asked Nutty about the shooting, and when he heard that they had no money for lessons, he said, "Well, I'll see what I can do for you. I'll have a word with a policeman friend of mine." He laughed again. "It'll be good for Seb and his friends to work a bit harder." And for a minute, Nutty almost felt sorry for Seb. Chapter 6. Riding and Shooting. Mr. Smith's police friend Mr. Potter called at Hawkwood and asked for Miss Deirdre McTavish, the captain of the Hawkwood Tetrathlon team. And so, to his great surprise, Sam Sylvester learned that there was still a Hawkwood team. Mr. Potter had brought guns and targets with him and was ready to start the first lesson. Everybody in the school wanted to try the shooting when they saw the guns. "Get lost!" cried Nutty. "None of you wanted to do the other things, so get lost before I shoot you." The first lesson went well, and Mr. Potter agreed to come down 2 or 3 times a week to teach them. They fixed 2 nights when they weren't swimming, and that left 2 nights for riding lessons, and Sunday off. Running was all the time, and so was taking out the horses. After all this hard work, Nutty was now much thinner, and Humi's thin arms and legs were really strong. They all looked strong and healthy, and Jazz most of all. But although Jazz was so good at running and swimming, he was still worried about his riding. "We're all better at some things than others," Nutty said to him. In fact, she thought that she was probably the worst of all of them at most things. True, she was good at riding, but that was only a quarter of the competition. The competition would be at Swallow Hall, a big country house with its own lake and swimming pool. First there was the shooting, then the 4-minute swim, the 2-mile run, and the riding. In each part, only the best 3 scores in the team were counted. But Nutty suddenly realized that they had never tried all 4 parts of the competition on the same day. They continued to work hard, and in the summer, Uncle Bean found some farms where they could try some real cross-country riding. Humi's horse Bones loved it. He seemed to remember his past as a racehorse, and went over the jumps like an express train, nearly frightening Humi to death. "You were wonderful, Humi," the others told him afterwards. Humi's face went bright red, and he forgot that he was afraid. Poor Jazz had problems. When Spot came to a jump, he stopped, but Jazz went on over his head. Then Nutty remembered something. Spot was in a circus. Perhaps he'll do it to music. So they brought some music and played it, and Spot stood up on his back legs and Jazz fell off again. But in the end, Spot jumped better to music. Nails had no problems with Firelight. She did anything that he wanted, and when he was in the factory with her on a warm summer evening, He was really happy. He liked being with her, and he was now a much nicer person. But he could not understand why he felt this way about an animal. Firelight usually lay down and slept next to Nails, but one night she did not do this. Instead, she moved around her box all the time. Nails began to think that she was ill. He was very worried and thought of going to ask Nutty what to do about it. But then Firelight grew quieter, and Nails fell asleep. He woke suddenly. Something was wrong. Firelight was ill again. "Oh, please don't die," he cried silently. Then, suddenly, Nails understood what was happening. Firelight was having a baby. When Nails saw the foal's little face appear, he laughed and cried at the same time. "You lovely baby," he said softly. This was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to him. He had to go and tell Nutty. Nutty's father was a little surprised to see Nails standing outside his door with a great big smile on his face at 4:45 in the morning. A sleepy Nutty appeared, and Nails told her his wonderful news. To his surprise, Nutty was not as happy about the foal as he was. She knew that Nails could not ride Firelight in the competition now, and when Nails learnt that Firelight and her foal would have to leave the factory because they needed grass, he too was unhappy. Then Uncle Bean remembered that he had the use of a field not far away. Firelight and her foal could go there. Nails discovered that there was a shed there too, where he could sleep, and he felt better about it. But he had lost interest in the competition and didn't care that he had no horse to ride. "But you have to care," Biddy told him, almost angrily. "It isn't just for you. You're part of a team. Everyone's worked really hard, so you have to ride for them." Biddy, in her own way, was as hard a person as Nails. The next night, she came on her motorbike to fetch him, took him to her place, and began to teach him to ride Switchback, one of her horses. It was a young horse, big, fast, and very frightening. But nobody argued with Biddy, so Nails hid his fear and rode Switchback over the jumps. It felt like flying, and Nails began to realize that he had never enjoyed anything in his life as much as this. He rode every evening and spent all his free time with Firelight and her foal, Bonfire. There were now only 3 weeks to the competition. Gloria told Nutty that Seb and his team had started to work hard too. "They're really worried," Gloria went on. "They'd hate to lose to the Hawkwood team, and they're going to cheat if they think you're winning. Seb told me." Nutty was very angry. "That's terrible," she said. "Well, if they cheat, why don't you cheat too?" "I don't know how," said Nutty. "But you find out their plans. I'll kill you if you don't tell me what's going on." Chapter 7. The competition day arrives. At last the big day came. Nutty, Humi, and Jazz met early at the factory and began to get the horses ready. Nails was late. Perhaps he was still asleep in his field with Firelight, Nutty thought crossly. Jazz's father was driving them to Swallow Hall. Mr. Potter was meeting them there with the guns, and Uncle Bean and Biddy would arrive at lunchtime with the horses. When they were ready to go, Nails had still not arrived. Nutty began to feel sick with worry. In the end, they left without him. "What'll we do if Nails doesn't come?" Humi asked. "We'll just have to be twice as good, right?" Nutty said bravely. "We can do it." Humi and Jazz were silent. They all knew that Nails was their best swimmer and their best runner. Without him, they would probably fail. Jazz had never been anywhere as grand as Swallow Hall before, and he felt that everyone was looking at his dark skin and his turban. But Nutty didn't seem to care how grand it was, although she found she was the only girl in the competition. "It's for boys, I told you," said Seb. He appeared out of the crowd looking very cool. "They don't usually let girls compete, and you haven't got a chance." "I know what I'm doing. Just go away, Seb dear," Nutty replied. She turned to the others. "Let's walk round the cross-country course," she said. She knew she wouldn't be strong enough to do it after the swim. Humi walked round smiling at all the jumps like old friends. "Are you all right, Humi?" Nutty asked him, worried. But Humi just went on smiling. Jazz looked miserable. "I hate the riding," he said. "Spot can do it," replied Nutty, "if you make him. And you must. You and Nails are our best scorers in the other things." God, where was Nails? He still wasn't there when they got back for the shooting. "He can shoot later," the official said. Seb and the others were shooting, and their score was not bad. Then it was Hawkwood's turn. Nutty didn't do well at first, but then she pretended it was Seb's face on the target. She hit his nose, his ears, and his mouth, and got a much better score. Jazz did well, too, but Humi's score was the worst. He hit Jazz's target twice. "You know I'm no good, Nutty," he said. "Come on," said Nutty. "The swimming. There was nothing you could do with Humi except kill him." They got changed ready for the swimming and came back to watch Seb's team. Then Humi realized that he'd left his goggles in the changing room and went to get them. When he came back, Colin, one of the Greycoats team, was swimming. He was very good indeed, and Nutty stared. Seb said that Colin was their worst swimmer. "But that can't be Colin," said Humi. "I've just seen Colin in the changing room." So that was why Colin was swimming so well. Everyone looked the same in goggles, and it wasn't Colin at all. They'd cheated. None of the officials noticed anything, and when they had finished the swimming, the Greycoats team all disappeared fast. Nutty was wild with anger. Then it was Hawkwood's turn to swim. 4 minutes of hard swimming felt like a long, slow death to Nutty, but she kept going, up and down, up and down, and when it was over, they had to pull her out of the water. When at last she could see again, Jazz was swimming beautifully, but there was still no Nails. Nutty went to get dressed, and when she came out to meet the others, she looked over towards the swimming pool. And at that moment, she saw a boy run in and start talking to the swimming officials. Nutty stared. Then she shouted to the others, "Look, there he is! Now we've got a chance of winning!" Nails had come at last. Chapter 8. Winners and Losers. Nails had already done his shooting, and now he swam wonderfully, moving fast and easily up and down the pool. It was a 10-meter pool, and Nails did 34 lengths in 4 minutes. Nutty wanted to laugh out loud with happiness. "Not bad," she said when Nails had finished. "But where have you been all this time?" Nails looked angry. "I was sleeping in the shed in Firelight's field last night, and the police came and got me. They asked me where I lived, and I wouldn't tell them, so they locked me up in the police station all night. I had to argue my way out this morning. Biddy came to fetch me because I told the police she was my mother. Biddy was a bit angry about that. Nutty wondered what would happen to Nails after today. Sleeping out in fields, no real home to go to, nothing to look forward to. But there was no time to worry about that now. There was still the running and the riding to do. Graycoats went first in the running, and Nutty watched them angrily. "We're well behind after that cheating," she said. "And just look at them now. Graycoats were running well." "We've just got to keep going," Nutty said. And they did. But it nearly killed Nutty. Humi, running in front of her, grew smaller and smaller, and Nutty realized that she was probably the worst of them all. But she finished, fell to the ground, and lay there with her eyes closed. When she opened them again, Biddy was there. At last! Nutty was free. Biddy would tell them all what to do now. "You've all got to ride like crazy if you're going to beat those Graycoat boys," Biddy said. By now the parents had all arrived and were enjoying their day out. Uncle Bean had brought the horses, and Humi was looking at Bones with dreamy eyes. He was in another world again. Nails and Jazz looked worried. Switchback, Nails's horse, looked very big and strong and would not be easy for him to ride. When Nutty went to look at the scores, she saw that her team had fallen well behind Graycoats now. They all needed clear rounds in the riding to have any chance of winning at all. Humi rode past on Bones, and Nutty suddenly realized that Bones was no longer the thin, miserable horse who had come to them. His eyes shone, and he looked more like a 3-year-old, ready to race and to win. Little Humi would never be able to stop him, Nutty thought worriedly. Graycoats began their riding, and Nutty was very pleased indeed when Seb fell into the first ditch. The rest of the Graycoats team looked worried, and Nutty smiled happily. Then she saw Gloria and rode up to her. "They cheated, didn't they?" Nutty said angrily, and Gloria looked uncomfortable. All 4 Graycoats riders did badly. "You've really got to go well," Nutty told her team. "We could beat them." But when they heard this, the others looked more worried than ever. The Graycoats team were now having some kind of discussion, and Gloria was with them. But it was time for Nutty to go. She was riding first, then Humi, and then Nails, and Jazz. Nutty was afraid that Jazz would not get round. Spot could do it with a strong rider, but Jazz wasn't strong enough, and Nutty was worried. The starter looked at his watch. "Go," he called, and Nutty had a wonderful feeling of excitement. This was what she was good at, and Midnight flew over the ground. The course seemed easy to Nutty as they went over the jumps with no trouble at all, across the next field, over the big ditch, and up into the woods. Away below her on the left, she could see the main road with the cars shining in the sun. But her way was to the right and down the hill. There she had to stop, get off her horse and open a gate, while an official timed her. The official was the mother of one of the Graycoats team, and her car was parked near the gate. But Nutty did well, and Midnight was off again, over the jumps and through the finish, fast and clear. Humi was waiting to go, with his eyes shining as he looked at his wonderful Bones. "Good luck," Nutty called, and Humi was away. Bones went off like an express train, and there was no way he was going to stop before he heard the crowd shouting for him at the finish. Just then, Gloria hurried up to Nutty. "They're going to cheat again," she said. "They've got a recording of God Save the Queen. They've hidden it in the official's car, and when Spot has to stop at the gate, They're going to play it, and Spot will lie down, Nutty finished. Don't worry, she said to Jazz. You're riding last, so if Humi and Nails go clear, then we're all right. Where is Humi? Nails said, worried. He should be out of the woods by now. He was going very fast. Nutty looked towards the top of the hill. There was no Humi, but there was something happening. People were running about wildly, and one of the officials had his red flag up, red for blood, which meant they needed an ambulance. But there were a lot of other flags too, and then cars starting up. One coming down the hill and others going up to meet it. People were shouting and looking serious. Humi was in trouble, Nutty realized, and she knew that both Nails and Jazz had to get clear rounds now. But she could also see, from the look of fear on Jazz's face, that he couldn't do it. But she knew she could. Colin cheated, she said, and so will we. I'll ride Spot. The others stared at her with open mouths. But you're the wrong color, said Nails. Gloria's got something that she uses to make her look brown. I'll put that on my face and I'll wear Jazz's turban. Our riding clothes are all the same, and if I keep moving fast, no one will ever know. Nails went off to start his riding, and the others hurried into the back of Uncle Bean's truck. A few minutes later, Nutty had become Jazz. I hope I don't really look like that, said Jazz. You hide here until I get back, said Nutty. And let's hope that Nails does a clear round. Nutty ran out and got onto Spot. She looked up the hill and saw Nails going well on switchback, but there was still no Humi. He must be still alive, but where was he? Then the starter called, Go! Zrania, and Nutty was away. Spot, surprised, was galloping before he had time to think. Nutty hurried him on, and he found it easier to jump than to refuse. They reached the wood safely, and from the top of the hill, Nutty saw Nails going fast towards the finish. They could still win. As Nutty came out of the wood, she saw the ambulances and cars, and a crowd of people looking down the hill. She had no time to see what was happening, and turned Spot towards the next jump. Then Bones and Humi suddenly appeared, coming up the hill from the main road and galloping very fast towards the jump in front of her. Bones flew over the jump, clearing it by about 2 meters, and Humi went up in the air and came down again, still on Bones's back. Now they were racing towards the gate, and Nutty, not far behind, could see that Bones wasn't going to stop until he won the race. The official was standing near the gate, but when she saw Bones and Humi racing towards her, she ran back to her car. Her son, who was sitting in the car, ready to play God Save the Queen for Spot, was frightened to death. He forgot how important it was to start the music and hid under the seat. Nutty got off Spot, went through the gate, and was away before the official and her son had climbed out of their car. Humi had already disappeared. Nutty rode on, a wild hope growing inside her. But she had forgotten that Jazz's parents were there with Biddy and the other parents. They would know that she wasn't Jazz. But she couldn't stop to explain, and rode on past them. She could feel Biddy's glassy stare and saw the mouths of the others fall open. But she kept going and finished with a clear round. She rode straight to the truck where the others were. Inside the truck, Nutty heard that Nails had had a clear round too. "We've done it!" she shouted. "We've beaten them!" Jazz, putting on his turban again, was laughing. "Have you heard? Humi rode 2 miles down the main road. "Not 2 miles," said Humi, "and because it was a main road, he had to go down to the roundabout before he could come back." "What?" "Humi, you didn't." "Bones jumped over onto the road. I couldn't stop him." Humi was white and shining when he spoke. "And you went round the roundabout?" Humi looked a bit uncomfortable. "I thought it was the right thing to do, but the traffic was a bit cross." But Nutty, Bones was wonderful. By now Nutty had cleaned her face, and she felt wonderful too. "We won," she cried. "We won. We cheated," Nails said. "So did they. It's fair if you all cheat." Nutty looked at Nails. He was smiling, actually smiling. It had been a great day for all of them, Nutty decided. Then she saw everybody walking towards them. There were all the parents, Biddy, the Greycoats teacher, and Sam Sylvester, and Seb and his team. "You cheated," Seb called out to Nutty. "Oh, yes?" Nutty said. "Who cheated? You rode twice, and Colin didn't swim." "You can't be sure about that. Nobody will believe you." "Well, you can't be sure that I rode twice. Everybody could see it was you. It's the way you ride. We'll tell the competition officials. And we'll tell them about Colin not swimming. And we'll get someone to look at God Save the Queen in Antony's mum's car by the gate." "Have you all gone crazy?" Biddy asked sweetly. The adults were all staring at the two teams, some amused, some not understanding. The Greycoats teacher looked cross. "If there's been some cheating, then there are no real winners or losers," he said. "And you'll all have to do the competition again next year." "That's just what I think," said Biddy. The 8 competitors looked at each other and fell silent in horror. Nutty couldn't believe it. The pain of all that running and swimming when you were half dead. But the adults loved the idea. They had had a nice day out and thought that tetrathlon sports were very good for young people. They all began to make plans. Sam Sylvester said that the school would help next time, and Biddy told Nutty to forget about the money for the riding lessons. The talking and laughing went on for some time as the adults discussed the day. "And did you see old Bones?" said Uncle Bean, "galloping down the main road. Even the police car couldn't catch him. What a horse!" And that was how it all ended. No winners, no losers, except that Jazz was invited by the Greycoats teacher to join a competition swimming team. And Jazz was very pleased about that because he really liked swimming. And Biddy offered Nails a job riding her horses, a room to sleep in, and a home for Firelight and her foal. Nails didn't say much, but he smiled. And Nutty knew that she had been a good captain. Perhaps one day she would be the captain of an Olympic riding team. And Humi? Well, Humi knew what he wanted in life now. Who said he had no ambition? The dreamy look was back in his eyes. He could be a famous rider, flying over the jumps on his horse like a bird of freedom. Perhaps tomorrow everything would seem different. But today was all right.